Abandoned in a mansion, a paraplegic billionaire is cared for by twin beggars. But during the time they spend at her side, an unexpected revelation touches their hearts in a way they could never imagine. The last pair of footsteps echoed through the halls of the mansion, and then silence. Claire Laurent opened her eyes in the dim light of the master bedroom, now stripped of all its former luxury. Mary, her housekeeper of 15 years, had left without saying goodbye. Only the distant sound of the iron gate creaking announced her final departure. Abandoned. The word echoed in her mind as her trembling hands gripped the arms of the wheelchair. The mansion, once vibrant with the presence of 30 staff members, was now a marble mausoleum of shadows. Not even the morning sun found its way through the dusty windows anymore. Gardeners who once meticulously tended the grounds had left weeks ago. "You gave us no choice," her butler of 2 decades, Thomas, had said before leaving with tear-filled eyes. "There's only so much anyone can bear." Claire turned the wheelchair with difficulty, facing her reflection in the Venetian mirror, the last valuable piece left in the room. Her once immaculate brown hair lay lifeless on her shoulders. Dark circles framed a face that, at 40, seemed to have aged a decade in the past year. A distant thunder made her shudder, stirring the memory she tried so hard to bury. The sound of twisting metal, shattering glass. 1 year earlier, "I don't care if she's the main shareholder. Cancel the meeting." Claire barked orders over the phone as her Mercedes sped through the rainy night. In the back seat, important contracts waited for her signature. Her life was a perfectly orchestrated symphony of power and success. The phone rang again. Without taking her eyes off the slick road, she answered, "Laurent speaking." That's when it happened. 1 second of distraction, the blinding glare of headlights. The scream caught in her throat. The world spun in slow motion. The Mercedes, her symbol of status, turned into a prison of twisted metal. The last sensation in her legs was the impact. Then, nothingness. Present. A flash of lightning lit the room, revealing empty spaces on the walls where expensive paintings once hung, all sold in recent months, a desperate attempt to maintain appearances. Her $500 million empire was collapsing, devoured by debts and the questionable management of her partner during her recovery. Claire tried to reach the glass of water on the bedside table, but her trembling fingers knocked it over. The crystal shattered on the marble floor, and she realized there was no one to clean up the mess, no one for anything. The tears she had fought so hard to hold back finally overflowed. The past week had been a silent exodus. First, the kitchen staff, unable to endure her fits of rage. Then, the drivers, tired of being humiliated when they offered help. Finally, her closest team, those who swore they would never leave her. "The wheelchair changed your mobility, not your heart," Mary had once said, before Claire's bitterness drove her away too. "But Ma'am, you're letting this situation turn you into someone we don't recognize anymore." The phone rang on the lower floor, its chime echoing through the empty mansion like a ghost. Claire didn't move to answer it. Why bother? It would just be another creditor, another person demanding something she could no longer give. Her gaze wandered around the room, landing on the lone envelope left on her vanity. It was the resignation letter from her personal assistant, Sophie, who had endured more than all the others. "I'm sorry," the letter read, "but I can't stand by and watch your self-destruction any longer." The rain started to pound harder, becoming a furious storm. Claire felt the chill of loneliness seep into her bones. The mansion, once a symbol of her success, was now her prison. The empty corridors mocked her, echoing memories of a life that no longer existed. Downstairs, something fell with a crash, probably another piece of decor succumbing to gravity and neglect. Claire didn't move to check. Why bother? Everything was crumbling anyway, objects and her life alike. Her empire, so proudly built over 2 decades, had turned into a house of cards. Now, in her darkest hour, no one stood by her side. No family. She had always neglected them in favor of work. No friends. They had all been pushed away by her arrogance long before the accident. Not even the employees she thought money could buy forever. The storm intensified outside, turning the once immaculate gardens into a rain-lashed jungle. Claire remained motionless in her wheelchair, a dethroned queen in her empty castle. The approaching night's shadows began to swallow the room, and she had neither the energy nor the reason to turn on the lights. The silence was deafening. No more clinking of cutlery in the kitchen, no more murmuring staff conversations, no more soft footsteps in the hallways. Only the wind howling through poorly shut windows and the occasional thunder that rattled the mansion's foundations. Claire closed her eyes, letting the tears flow freely now. There was no one left to see her cry, after all. She was completely alone. She had no idea that that stormy night would bring more than just rain and thunder. Fate, in its mysterious wisdom, was about to send her two little angels, even if they appeared in the most unexpected form. The first drops of rain were falling when Thomas squeezed his twin brother's small hand. "It's okay, Paul. I promised I'd take care of you, remember?" His childish voice carried a premature maturity that no 5-year-old should have. Paul, clinging to a tattered teddy bear, his only survivor from their old life, just nodded. His big blue eyes watched the sky darkening quickly. The donated clothes they wore, already too big for their thin frames, were soaked by the light drizzle. "I'm hungry, Thomas," Paul murmured, his voice barely a whisper. Thomas reached into the patched pocket of his coat, pulling out half of a hard roll he had saved from breakfast at the shelter. Without hesitation, he handed the larger piece to his brother. "Eat slowly," he instructed, as he always did. "Make it last, like Mom taught us." The mention of their mother brought tears to Paul's eyes, but Thomas quickly distracted him by pointing to a sparrow hopping nearby. "Look over there. He looks like the one we saw yesterday." That was how Thomas protected his brother ever since they'd been on their own, by finding small moments of joy stolen from the harshness of the streets. Paul was the dreamer, the sensitive one. Thomas had become the protector, the strong one, even though his own child's heart bled with longing too. The rain grew heavier, and the twins took shelter under the awning of a closed store. The cutting wind made their teeth chatter, and Paul huddled closer to his brother, sharing what little warmth they had. "The lady at St. Francis shelter said there's no more room," Paul whispered, clutching his teddy bear. "Where are we going to sleep tonight?" Thomas bit his lip, feeling the weight of responsibility on his small shoulders. His eyes scanned the darkened street until something caught his attention. A large iron gate at the end of the block. Beyond it, partially hidden by old trees, a mansion rose against the stormy sky. "There," he pointed, his eyes shining with hope. "It looks abandoned. Maybe there's a warm corner we can sleep in." Paul hesitated, his eyes wide with fear. "But what if there's a ghost?" Thomas smiled, taking his brother's hand. "There's no such thing as ghosts, silly. And even if there were, I'm here to protect you. I'm your big brother, remember?" "Only by 3 minutes," Paul protested softly, a small smile appearing on his lips. They dashed across the street, their tiny footprints leaving marks on the wet sidewalk. The gate was ajar, gently creaking in the wind. Thomas pushed it just enough for them to slip through, and the twins entered the abandoned garden. The tall grass reached the children's waists, and Paul gripped his brother's hand more tightly. The mansion, imposing and dark, seemed to watch them with its vacant windows. But for two little angels from the streets, it was a possible refuge from the approaching storm. "Look," Thomas whispered excitedly, pointing to a low window on the side of the house. "We can get in there." Paul clutched his teddy bear to his chest. "Are you sure?" "Trust me," Thomas grinned, that reassuring smile that always calmed his brother. "Just think, maybe there's a warm bed inside. Warm, or at least a soft rug." The promise of comfort overcame fear, and Paul followed his brother through the overgrown yard. They moved like tiny explorers, Thomas leading the way courageously, Paul faithfully trailing as it had always been. The window was merely latched, and Thomas pushed it open slowly, making it squeak. "I'll go first," he whispered. "If it's safe, I'll help you in." With agility born of necessity, Thomas hoisted himself inside. For a few tense seconds, Paul was alone in the garden, clutching his teddy bear, until he heard his brother's whisper, "Come on, give me your hand." The mansion's interior was a world of shadows and mysterious shapes. The faint light from outside revealed furniture draped in white sheets, like silent ghosts. The air smelled of dust and neglect. "It's so quiet," Paul murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Thomas gripped his hand tighter. "That's better. Means there's no one here to kick us out." The twins crept down the dark hallway, their small footsteps echoing softly on the marble floor. Paul held his teddy bear close to his face, seeking comfort in its familiar scent, while Thomas looked around with brave curiosity. "Over there." Thomas pointed to a room with large windows. "There's a couch that looks soft." The children approached the covered piece of furniture, and Thomas gently tugged at the sheet, revealing a red velvet sofa. For two little street angels, it looked like a royal throne. "Tonight we'll sleep like princes," Thomas smiled, helping Paul onto the couch. Paul snuggled into the plush velvet, his eyes already heavy with sleep. "Tell me a story, Thomas, like Mom used to." Thomas swallowed the lump in his throat and sat beside his brother. "Once upon a time, there were two twin princes," he began, his soft voice lulling his brother. "They were very brave and always took care of each other." The storm raged outside, but inside the abandoned mansion, the little angels had found refuge. Paul soon fell asleep, still clutching his teddy bear, while Thomas kept watch, protecting his brother's sleep as he always did. They had no idea they weren't alone in the big house. Upstairs, a different story was about to intertwine with theirs, forever changing the fate of the little twins. Chapter 3. The Encounter. A deafening crack of thunder shook the mansion, startling Paul awake. Thomas, still on guard by his brother's side, instinctively pulled him close. "Shh. It was just thunder," he whispered. But something in his voice told Paul there was more. In the darkness, Thomas's wide eyes were fixed on a spot in the corridor. A squeaking of wheels cut through the silence. The children froze. From the darkness of the hallway emerged a figure in a wheelchair. Lightning lit her in ghostly flashes, a woman with disheveled hair and a wild look in her eyes. "Who's there?" Her voice lashed the air, making Paul shrink behind his brother. "How dare you invade my house?" Thomas instinctively placed himself in front of Paul, though his small legs were trembling. The woman advanced in her chair, and now they could see her face twisted with anger. "Get out! Get out now!" Claire shouted, her hands gripping the wheels of her chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Isn't it enough that everyone abandoned me? Now I have to deal with little intruders." Paul began to cry silently, clinging to his teddy bear. Thomas, however, took a small step forward. Something in the woman's eyes, beyond the anger, held a loneliness he recognized. "Please, ma'am," his childish voice trembled but stayed firm. "There's a really bad storm outside. Can we just stay until the rain stops?" Lightning illuminated the room, immediately followed by deafening thunder. The windows shook with the power of the storm, and the wind howled like a wounded animal. "I don't care if the sky is falling," Claire snarled, but there was a different note in her voice now. "You have no right to—" She stopped abruptly when Paul, still hidden behind his brother, timidly pointed to a nearby tray. "You haven't eaten anything," he whispered, his voice almost inaudible. Claire followed the child's gaze. There were stacked plates, uneaten food from several days, half-empty glasses. Evidence of her loneliness and her giving up, exposed to a child's innocent eyes. "That's none of your business." She tried to keep the hardness in her voice, but something faltered. Her eyes took in the children's thin faces, their soaked, worn clothes. Where are your parents?" Thomas swallowed hard, instinctively pulling Paul closer. "In heaven," he answered simply. And in those two words lay a world of pain Claire recognized instantly. The silence that followed was broken only by the wind's howl and the rain drumming on the windows. Claire studied the twins, so small, so fragile, yet with a strength she recognized. The boy in front, clearly the protector, reminded her of herself years ago when she still fought for what she believed in. The smaller one, hiding behind his brother, held a ragged teddy bear as if it were his last link to a kinder world. What are your names?" The question slipped from her lips before she could stop it, her voice softer now. "I'm Thomas," answered the braver one, then gently pulled his brother forward. "And this is my brother, Paul." Paul glanced up briefly, and Claire felt something strange inside her chest, a tightness she hadn't felt in a long time. The boy's big, fearful eyes seemed to see right through her defenses. "Do you live alone in this big house?" Paul asked softly, surprising both Claire and his brother with the direct question. Claire felt her hands tremble on the wheelchair's rims. "Yes, now I do," she replied, bitterness creeping into her voice more than she intended. Everyone left." Thomas looked around the dark room, noticing the empty spaces on the walls, the covered furniture, the accumulated dust. "Just like us," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. A particularly loud thunderclap made the windows rattle, and Paul jumped in fright, dropping his teddy bear. Before anyone could react, the toy rolled to a stop at the foot of Claire's wheelchair. There was a tense moment as she leaned forward, with difficulty, to pick up the teddy bear. Her hands, once so confident in commanding corporate empires, now trembled as she held the ragged toy. Paul's eyes followed her every movement, not with fear, but with genuine concern at seeing her struggle. You dropped this," Claire said, her voice husky, holding the bear out to him. Paul approached cautiously to retrieve it, and in that brief moment, their eyes met. Claire saw something there that unsettled her, not pity as she often saw in others, but a kind of understanding only children can have. "Thank you," he whispered, and then, to everyone's surprise, he added, "You look like you need a hug from Mr. Cuddles too." "Mr. Cuddles," Claire repeated, the word sounding odd on her bitter tongue. "That's my teddy bear's name," Paul explained, his voice gaining a bit more confidence. "He always makes me feel better when I'm sad." Claire felt something warm and wet on her face, and with horror realized they were tears. How many years had it been since anyone cared how she felt? "That's enough," she tried to regain her harsh tone, but her voice faltered. You can stay until the storm passes, but just until then." Thomas nodded solemnly, as though sealing a business deal. "Thank you, Mom. We promise we'll be quiet." "Claire," she heard herself say, to her own surprise. "My name is Claire." The storm raged on outside, but inside the mansion, something had changed. In the darkness, three lonely souls had found each other. Claire watched the twins settle back on the sofa, Paul still clutching Mr. Cuddles, Thomas standing guard beside him. She began to turn her chair to leave, but paused at the soft sound of Paul's voice. "Good night, Miss Claire." Something inside her, something that had frozen on the day of the accident, began, very slowly, to melt. Claire stared at the phone in her lap, her fingers hovering over the numbers. Calling social services would be the logical decision, the only sensible decision. After all, what could she, a bitter and paraplegic woman, do for two street children? Downstairs, she heard the gentle voices of the twins. She had given them some old blankets and allowed them to stay on the living room sofa. "Just until the storm passes," she kept telling herself. But the conversation drifting through the silent mansion began to captivate her. "I'm hungry, Thomas." Paul's voice was just a whisper. "I know," Thomas replied, his small voice heavy with responsibility. "Tomorrow I'll find something for us to eat. Remember that bakery. Sometimes they leave old bread for us." Claire felt her stomach clench. How many times had she wasted expensive food at her business dinners? "Thomas?" Paul's voice trembled slightly. "Do you think Mum is watching us from heaven?" There was a moment of silence, broken only by the rain tapping against the windows. "I'm sure she is," Thomas finally answered, his voice choking up. "And she must be proud because we're together, taking care of each other like she asked." Claire rolled her wheelchair silently to the top of the stairs, carefully navigating the marble floor. "What if Miss Claire calls those people again?" Paul asked, clearly referring to social services. "The ones who wanted to separate us." "They won't separate us," Thomas stated with a conviction that made Claire's heart ache. "I promised Mom I'd always take care of you, remember?" "Miss Claire seems sad like Mom was after the accident," Paul observed innocently. Claire froze in her wheelchair. "That's true," Thomas agreed thoughtfully. "But Mom always said that even if you're hurt on the outside, you can still love on the inside. Maybe Miss Claire just forgot how—" The tears Claire had been holding back began to fall silently. Her hands trembled on the wheelchair's rims. "You know she reminds me of Mom?" Thomas continued in a hushed voice, "the way she tries to act angry even when she's sad. Mom did that too whenever she was in pain, remember? But Mom always smiled afterward," Paul countered. "That's because we made her smile," Thomas replied. "Maybe Miss Claire just needs someone to make her smile too." Claire backed away, her hands shaking so badly she could barely maneuver the wheelchair. Back in her room, she stared at the phone lying on her bed. The screen displayed the social services number, but she couldn't bring herself to dial it. The hours dragged by. The storm began to subside, but Claire remained awake, listening to the occasional whispers of the boys downstairs. "I'm scared to sleep," Paul admitted at one point. "Why?" Thomas asked gently. "What if when we wake up, we have to leave? It's warm here. And Miss Claire, even though she's grumpy, reminds me of Mum too." Claire felt her heart constrict. How many people had tried to help her since the accident, only to be pushed away by her bitterness? Around midnight, she heard small footsteps on the stairs. Her first instinct was to shout for them to go back down, but something stopped her. Through the partially open door, she saw Thomas carrying Paul, and who seemed to have tripped. "Sorry, Miss Claire," Thomas whispered, realizing she was awake. "Paul needed the bathroom, but it's so dark." Claire watched as the 5-year-old boy carried his brother's weight without complaint. How many nights on the street had forced him to be more than just a child? The bathroom is the second door on the right," she heard herself say, her voice hoarse from holding back tears. After the boys returned downstairs, Claire rolled her chair to the window. The moon had finally appeared, piercing the dispersing clouds. Her reflection on the glass showed a face streaked with tears she hadn't realized she was shedding. The next morning, she woke to the sound of muffled laughter. A sound the mansion hadn't heard in so long it felt like another lifetime. Following the noise, she found the twins in the kitchen. They had discovered some old crackers in a cupboard and were carefully dividing each one into equal parts. "Save one for Miss Claire," Paul insisted, separating a cracker. "But you're hungrier," Thomas argued. "Mum always said we have to share," Paul replied with a wisdom beyond his years. Claire felt something inside her break, the icy wall she had built around her heart since the accident. Watching these two children, who had nothing yet still thought of sharing, she felt shame for her own bitterness. Her voice trembled, startling the boys. "I have some food in the fridge. Not much, but would you like some eggs?" The smile that lit up Paul's face was like a ray of sunshine after a storm. Thomas, always more cautious, studied her face for a moment before offering a timid grin as well. "Do you know how to cook eggs?" Paul asked with genuine curiosity. "Actually, no," Claire admitted, surprised by her own honesty. "I always had cooks do that. But maybe we can learn together." And so, that cold morning after the storm, 3 lonely souls tried to make scrambled eggs in a kitchen long out of use. The eggs turned out a bit burnt, with some shells mixed in. But the twins' laughter as they tried to help awakened something in Claire, a distant memory of when life wasn't measured by success and power, but by simple moments of shared joy. The phone with the social services number remained forgotten in her room. For now, at least, Claire decided it could wait a little longer. After all, the storm outside hadn't completely passed yet, or so she told herself. Morning arrived with a different clarity in the mansion. Claire woke to the soft sound of a broom scraping across the marble floor. Intrigued, she guided her wheelchair to the bedroom door and found Thomas, focused on sweeping the hallway. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice gentler than she intended. Thomas paused, holding a broom nearly twice his size. "Cleaning," he answered simply. "Mom always said that when someone helps us, we need to give back." Claire felt a lump form in her throat. "And where is your brother?" As if in response, Paul appeared carrying a duster. "Right here. I'm wiping the furniture, just like Mom taught me." His little face was smudged with dust, but his eyes gleamed with pride. You don't have to do that," Claire murmured, feeling off balance. "We want to help," Thomas stated with a seriousness beyond his 5 years. "If we help, maybe we can stay a little longer." The request caught Claire off guard. She looked at the 2 boys, so small yet trying to be so strong. Thomas with his broom like a little soldier, Paul with his duster like a peace flag. "We can be your helpers," Paul suggested excitedly. "Thomas is really strong. He can reach things for you, and I know how to do origami. My teacher showed us before." His voice trailed off, and Claire sensed a painful story yet untold. "Did you used to go to school?" she asked gently. Thomas nodded. "Mom was a teacher," he explained. "She taught us to read before we even started school. She said books are doors to other worlds." As if to prove his point, Paul dashed to the ragged backpack they carried and pulled out a crumpled children's book. "Look, I can read." Before Claire could reply, Paul was already seated on the floor beside her wheelchair, opening the book with reverential care. To her surprise, the boy began to read with impressive fluency for his age. The little prince couldn't understand how he'd ended up on that strange planet, Paul read in his clear, melodic voice. But soon he realized that sometimes we need to get lost in order to find ourselves. Claire felt her eyes well up. How many times had she walked past her own library, ignoring the books now gathering dust? How many stories lay waiting to be discovered? Can I show you the library?" she offered tentatively. The twins' eyes lit up like stars. Claire guided them down the corridors to a large carved wooden door. When she opened it, Paul let out a gasp of awe. Even blanketed in dust, the library still retained its grandeur, floor-to-ceiling shelves, rolling ladders to reach the highest books, large windows letting in the sunlight. For two children who loved books, it was like stepping into an enchanted palace. Can we look around?" Thomas asked, for the first time dropping his serious demeanor and showing childlike excitement. Claire nodded, and the boys began their careful exploration. She watched as they treated each book with reverence, reading titles aloud, sharing discoveries with each other. Then it happened. Paul, leafing through a thick book of fairy tales, dislodged something hidden between its pages. An old photograph fluttered through the air, landing at the wheels of Claire's chair. "Sorry," Paul exclaimed, rushing to pick it up. But when his eyes fell on the image, he froze. Claire leaned forward with difficulty to see what had startled him. The photo showed two young women in a sunlit garden. One of them she recognized immediately. Herself, many years younger, smiling in a way she had long forgotten she could. The other, "Thomas," Paul called, his voice trembling. "Thomas, come see." Thomas approached, and his eyes widened at the photo. She looks like Mom," Paul finished in a whisper. Claire felt her world spin. The woman in the photo beside her, the one smiling so tenderly, bore an unsettling resemblance to someone she had long buried in her past. "But it couldn't be, could it? What was your mom's name?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "Sophie," Thomas replied. "Sophie Laurent." The sound of shattering glass echoed through the library. Claire had dropped the reading glasses she was holding, her hands trembling uncontrollably. Sophie Laurent, her younger sister. The sister she had driven out of her life so long ago for reasons that now seemed insignificant. "Are you okay?" Paul asked, stepping closer in concern. His small hand touched Claire's arm with a gentleness that made her want to weep. "Yes," she lied, trying to steady her shaking. "I'm just surprised by the photo." Ever the observant one, Thomas studied her face closely. "Did you know our mom?" Claire opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. How could she tell two children that she was their aunt? The aunt who never wanted to meet them, who ignored every invitation to visit, who was too busy building an empire to care about family. "I think we need to tidy up this library," she said instead, her voice raspy. Would you two like to be my library assistants?" The boys nodded eagerly, temporarily distracted from the photograph by the promise of a new adventure. Claire slipped the picture into her pocket, her heart pounding. As she watched the twins organize books and dust shelves, Claire felt the weight of her past choices. Every smile from Paul, every protective gesture from Thomas, was a living reminder of Sophie, the sister she had lost twice, first by choice, then forever. The library, long dead and dusty, came alive with the children's voices reading titles, asking questions, sharing discoveries. And Claire, sitting in her wheelchair, began to realize that maybe fate was giving her a second chance, not just at having a family, but at redeeming her past mistakes. The photograph in her pocket felt as heavy as lead, holding secrets she wasn't ready to reveal. For now, she would observe these little angels fate had placed in her path, trying to understand how her sister, even after departing, still found ways to touch her hardened heart. The mansion's kitchen, once a mausoleum of loneliness, now echoed with childish laughter. Claire watched in amazement as a simple attempt to make pancakes transformed the atmosphere. Flour covered the floor, the countertops, and especially the twins' smiling faces. "I think we used too much flour," Paul giggled, trying to wipe the white powder from his nose. "There's no such thing as too much flour," Thomas replied with comical seriousness, his eyebrows dusted white. "Mum used to say the best part of cooking is making a mess." Claire found herself smiling, something that was happening more often these days. It was remarkable how two small children had brought so much warmth back into this cold house. Every morning, Thomas woke early to help adjust her wheelchair cushion, his little hands surprisingly firm. Just like the nurse taught Mum. Paul would appear soon after, bringing her a glass of water and sharing some fantastical story about his dreams. "You need to flip the pancake now," Thomas instructed, watching the frying pan intently. "It's like turning the page of a book. You have to be careful not to tear it." Claire tried following his advice, but the pancake folded awkwardly. "I don't think I'm very good at this," she admitted, surprised at her own ability to laugh at her mistakes. "That's okay," Paul consoled her, patting her arm. "Mum's first pancake was always lopsided too. She said crooked things have more personality." At that moment, Thomas, trying to reach more flour on a high shelf, accidentally knocked over an old recipe box. Its contents spilled across the kitchen floor, revealing yellowed recipe cards and magazine clippings. Among them, several photographs slid out. "Sorry," Thomas exclaimed, crouching to pick everything up quickly. Paul joined him, but suddenly froze, his eyes fixed on one of the pictures. "Thomas, look!" Claire rolled her chair closer, curious. The photograph showed two young women in a rose garden. One was herself, years younger, wearing a smile she'd long forgotten how to make. The other, "It's Mom," Paul whispered, his eyes wide. Claire felt her heart stop. Sophie was smiling in the photo, her face radiant among roses, the very roses their mother had loved to grow. That picture had been taken the last summer they spent together as sisters, before ambition and pride drove them apart. "Did you know our mom?" Thomas asked, his small voice trembling with emotion. Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came out. How to explain? How to say that the smiling woman in the photo, who looked so much like them, was her sister? The sister she had shut out of her life out of pride and arrogance. "Mom had this same picture in her room," Paul continued, his tiny fingers tracing the image. "But she never told us who the other lady was." The smell of something burning filled the kitchen, the forgotten pancake in the frying pan. Thomas quickly turned off the stove, moving with the efficiency of someone used to running a household. "Let's clean up this mess," he said, gathering the fallen papers. "Mom used to say that after a mess comes organization." Claire watched the boys work in unison, Thomas cleaning methodically, Paul carefully setting aside the photos, such small gestures, yet filled with a maturity that broke her heart. That night, after the twins went to bed, Claire stayed in the now-clean kitchen. On the table, the photograph seemed to glow under the soft lamplight. Her fingers traced Sophie's face, the same smile she now saw in Paul, the same determination she recognized in Thomas. Tiny footsteps startled her. Paul stood at the kitchen door, hugging his teddy bear. "You can't sleep?" Claire asked gently. Paul shook his head, coming closer. "You looked sad looking at that picture." "Not sad," Claire responded, surprised at her own honesty. "Just thoughtful." Paul rested his head on the arm of her wheelchair, a gesture of trust that made her eyes burn with tears. "Mom used to look at old pictures like that sometimes too. Then she'd hug us and say that even when we're sad, we can choose to make someone else smile." Claire felt a tear roll down her cheek. How could two small children have so much wisdom? How could they, after losing so much, still give so much love? "Do you want a hug?" Paul offered innocently. Thomas says I'm a hugging expert. Before she could answer, she felt his little arms wrap around her. And there, in the kitchen that had come alive again, Claire Laurent, the woman who had built walls around her heart, allowed herself to be comforted by a 5-year-old boy who, without knowing it, was part of her own story. 3 weeks had passed since the stormy night. The Laurent mansion, once a tomb of solitude, now pulsed with a life Claire barely remembered. The twins' laughter echoed through the corridors, filling every empty space with a joy she thought she had lost forever. That sunny morning, Claire watched from the balcony as Thomas and Paul played in the garden. The weeds had been replaced by a small flower bed they had planted to brighten the house, as Paul said. Thomas watered the seedlings diligently, while Paul talked to each flower, giving them names. "Miss Claire," Paul yelled, waving eagerly. "The rose pink said she's going to grow really tall." Claire caught herself smiling, something that happened more and more frequently. Who would have thought that after losing everything, she would find so much wealth in the smiles of 2 children? The sound of the doorbell cut through the air, making all 3 freeze. Visitors were rare since Claire had isolated herself. Thomas immediately ran to Paul, adopting his usual protective posture. "Boys, go to the library," Claire instructed, her heart pounding. Instinct told her she needed to protect them. Through the side window, Claire saw a woman in a grey suit standing at the door, holding a folder. The knot in Claire's stomach tightened. "Good morning," the woman greeted when Claire opened the door. "I'm Alice Martin from Social Services. We're visiting all residences in the area." Claire felt her blood run cold. "Is something wrong?" "We're looking for 2 twin boys, about 5 years old," Alice explained, consulting her folder. "They disappeared from St. Francis Shelter a few weeks ago. We've been conducting systematic searches throughout the region." In the library, a book fell. Though distant, the sound made Claire's heart race. "I live alone," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Since the accident, I don't get many visitors." Alice looked inside, through the open door. "If you don't mind, we need to do a quick check. Standard procedure. We're concerned about the children's welfare." Claire felt her hands grip the wheelchair rims. "Do you have a warrant?" "Miss Laurent," Alice sighed, "we're not here to cause trouble. We just want to ensure the safety of 2 vulnerable children. They're just frightened orphans who need proper care." "And what do you consider proper care?" Claire asked, her voice gaining an edge she hadn't used in a while. "Separating 2 brothers who only have each other." Alice's gaze sharpened. "How do you know they're brothers?" Claire realized her slip, but years of business negotiations helped her maintain composure. "It's usual procedure, isn't it? Siblings end up in different foster homes." Before Alice could respond, a small sneeze echoed from the library. Paul could never hold in his sneezes. "Excuse me," Alice said firmly, stepping forward. "No," Claire blocked the doorway with her chair. "You're not entering my house without a warrant." "Miss Laurent, if you're hiding those children—" "What I'm doing," Claire interrupted, "is exercising my right to privacy. If you want to come back with a warrant, I'll cooperate. Until then, have a good day." Closing the door, Claire found she was trembling, not with fear but with a determination she hadn't felt in years. She rolled her chair quickly toward the library, finding the twins hiding behind a shelf. "Is she going to take us away?" Paul asked, tears in his eyes. "No," Claire answered, her tone surprisingly firm. "I won't let anyone separate you." Thomas watched her with serious eyes. "But you could get in trouble because of us." Claire felt her heart ache. How could a 5-year-old carry so much concern? "Come here," she said, opening her arms. It was the first time she'd done so, and for a moment she feared she was overstepping, but the boys didn't hesitate. Paul practically jumped into her lap, while Thomas approached more cautiously, yet still allowed himself to be embraced. "You brought life back to this house," Claire whispered, holding them close to her chest. "You brought life back to me. Now it's my turn to protect you." That night, after the boys finally fell asleep, in proper bedrooms she had prepared for them, not just on the couch, Claire stayed up making phone calls. Her name still had some influence, and she knew she'd need legal help. The mansion, which only weeks ago was her private tomb, was now a battleground where she would fight with all her might. Not for her lost fortune or wounded pride, but for something infinitely more precious, the smiles of two children who, without meaning to, had become her reason to live. On the table beside her bed, the photograph of Claire with Sophie seemed to smile under the lamp's glow. So many years lost to pride, so many squandered chances. But now, through these little angels, there was perhaps a chance for redemption. The sound of tiny footsteps in the corridor caught her attention. Paul soon appeared in the doorway, followed by Thomas. "We can't sleep," Paul admitted, clutching his teddy bear. "Can we stay with you?" Thomas asked, trying to sound brave, though fear lingered in his eyes. Claire felt her eyes fill with tears. "Of course you can." The boys settled on either side of her chair, and Paul began to softly hum a lullaby, the same one Sophie used to sing, the same their mother had once sung for them. "Crystal Moon." His childish voice was a soothing balm. Claire closed her eyes, letting her tears flow freely. Somewhere, she was sure, Sophie was smiling. Her sister had always believed in the power of love to change people. Now, through her children, she was proving it once again. "No one's going to separate us," Claire promised, to both the boys and the memory of her sister. "No one." "Miss Claire, look what I found." Paul's excited voice echoed from the garden. Claire rolled her chair to the office window, watching as he proudly displayed a rosebud beginning to bloom in the flower bed they had planted together. "Hair's just like the one in the picture," he shouted, pointing to the photograph now prominently displayed in the living room, the one showing two sisters smiling in a rose garden, still united by a love that time and pride had tried to destroy. Then it happened. Maneuvering her chair back to the desk, Claire bumped into an old shelf. The impact knocked down a wooden box from the top, spilling its contents like autumn leaves onto the floor. Letters, dozens of them. With trembling hands, Claire picked up the first envelope. The return address made her heart stop. Sophie Laurent. The date, 6 years ago. The seal had never been broken. Out in the garden, she could hear Thomas's laughter as he helped Paul water the roses. The sound gave her the courage to do what she should have done years ago. Open the first letter. "Dear Claire, I have wonderful news to share. I'm pregnant, and it's not just one baby, it's twins. I can hardly believe I'm going to be the mother of 2 little angels. The doctor says they're boys. I know we haven't spoken since that terrible night, when you said I was throwing my life away by choosing to teach instead of joining the family business. But Claire, you're my only sister. How can I give birth without you by my side? Please write back. I want my children to know their aunt. With love, 259. Sophie?" Tears blurred Claire's vision, but she continued. The next letter was dated 5 months later. "Claire, the babies are growing strong. The doctor says one of them is more restless. I can already sense his protective personality. The other is calmer, more observant, exactly like we were, remember? You always protecting me always dreaming. I've chosen their names, Thomas Keyes in honor of Dad, and Paul. Remember how we used to joke that if we ever had a brother, he'd be called Paul. Please, Claire, don't let pride be bigger than love. Sophie." Paul's voice called his brother from the garden to show him something, making Claire shiver. How many times had she tossed these letters into a box without even reading them? How many precious moments had she missed? Another letter, this one from 4 years ago. "My sister, the boys turned 1 today. Thomas already tries to take care of Paul. It's amazing how he always knows when Paul is about to cry. They're so close, Claire. They remind me of us before money and power mattered more than love. Thomas has your protective spirit, you know. And Paul. Oh, Paul has that same sensitivity you used to have before you hid it behind walls of pride. There's still time for you to meet them. There's still time for us to be a family. With longing, Sophie." From the garden, Thomas's voice. "Careful, Paul, I'll get it for you." Claire stifled a sob. How had she missed it before? How had she not seen Sophie in every gesture of these children? The next letter made her blood run cold. It was from only a year ago, the paper stained with tears. "Claire, the doctor says the cancer is too advanced. I've tried everything, but there isn't much time left. My little angels will be alone in this world. They're so small, Claire. So small. And soon they'll face life without a mother. If this letter ever reaches you, if one day you decide to open it, please find my boys. They'll be at St. Francis Shelter. In my heart, I know you'll eventually realize that power and money mean nothing compared to the love of a family. Thomas and Paul are parts of me, but they're also parts of you, Claire. They have our strength, our determination, but most importantly, they still have that pure love we shared in childhood before the world tore us apart. My last wish is that you find them. Give them the love I can't anymore. Be the wonderful aunt I know you can be. The incredible sister you once were. And Claire, I forgive you. I always have. The love between sisters is stronger than any disagreement, any pride, with eternal love, Sophie. The final letter slipped from her trembling hands. In the garden, the twins had started singing, that same lullaby their grandmother used to sing, which Sophie later sang to her sons. Crystal moon that makes me dream. Claire looked out the window, watching the boys. Thomas carefully guiding Paul to plant another rose, exactly as Sophie had described. Always protective, always caring. Paul chatting with the flowers, his sensitivity shining in every gesture. Fate, in its mysterious wisdom, had brought her nephews to her. Not through the letters she never opened, not through the shelter Sophie had mentioned, but through a storm that guided them to her door. "Miss Claire," Paul called from the window, his face dirty with soil, but beaming with happiness. "Come see, the rose we planted is growing." "It's like the roses in the picture," Thomas added proudly. Claire wiped her tears and began to roll her chair toward the garden. The letters could wait. This was a moment to live in the present that fate had gifted her. A present Sophie, in her infinite wisdom and love, had prepared without even knowing. As she approached the boys, Claire made a silent promise to Sophie. This time, she wouldn't waste her chance to love. This time, she would be the family these little angels deserved. "Tell me more about these roses," she asked, her voice tight with restrained emotion. And as the twins eagerly chatted about their discoveries in the garden, Claire felt, for the first time in many years, that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The circle was closing, and through the love of these little angels, she was finally coming home. Thomas's scream woke Claire in the middle of the night. "Miss Claire, Paul's not okay." She would never forget the scene when she entered the boys' room. Paul was curled up on the bed, shaking violently, his little face flushed with fever. Thomas held his brother's hand, silent tears rolling down his cheeks. "He started trembling," Thomas explained, his small voice quivering. "Like Mom did when she got sick." Claire felt her heart go cold. Carefully, she leaned out of her wheelchair to touch Paul's forehead. It was burning. "My head hurts," Paul moaned weakly, his eyes glassy with fever. "I want Mom." Claire immediately grabbed her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed the taxi service she'd been using since her accident, the only one with wheelchair-accessible cars. "It's an emergency," she explained urgently. "I need to get to the hospital with a sick child." "Thomas, I need you to be strong," Claire said, struggling to keep her voice calm. "Go to my room and get my bag, the big brown one, and bring a blanket." While Thomas ran off, Claire also called the hospital, warning them of her arrival. Every minute felt like torture as she watched Paul tremble more and more. Thomas returned quickly, carrying the bag and the blanket. Carefully, they wrapped Paul in it. Claire felt helpless in her wheelchair, relying on a 5-year-old's assistance, but Thomas displayed a surprising strength and maturity. "The taxi's here, Miss Claire," Thomas announced, peering out the window. The driver, a man Claire recognized from previous rides, immediately grasped the gravity of the situation. He helped settle Paul in the back seat, with Thomas holding his head in his lap, and carefully placed Claire's wheelchair in the trunk. "Central Hospital, as fast as you can," Claire instructed, her voice trembling as she held Paul's feverish hand. During the ride, every red light felt like an eternity. In the back seat, Thomas softly sang the lullaby their mum had sung, the same one their grandmother once sang. "Crystal moon that makes me dream." Tears streamed down Claire's face. In her bag, Sophie's letters felt like they were burning, filled with words of love she had once ignored. Now, holding Paul's burning hand, she silently vowed never to fail her family again. At last, they arrived at the hospital. The driver, who introduced himself as Robert, insisted on helping them out, refusing to charge for the ride. "I have grandkids," he said simply. A team of nurses, alerted by Claire's call, rushed over with a gurney. "High fever, convulsions," Claire rattled off as they transferred Paul. "He's 5 hours, no known allergies that I'm aware of." "Are you his mother?" a nurse asked. Claire hesitated for a split second. "I'm his aunt. His mother passed away." That's when a voice cut through the ER. "Actually, legally, you're nothing to them." Alice Martin, the social worker, stood at the entrance, holding a thick folder. "I came as soon as I got the hospital alert about 2 missing children." "Please," Claire begged, her voice breaking. "Not now. He needs treatment." "Exactly why I'm here," Alice replied, pulling out documents. "I have a court order to place the boys in state custody. They require proper care, not what?" Claire challenged, her voice finding the strength that once allowed her to run empires. "Not someone in a wheelchair, not someone who crossed the city in the middle of the night to save his life." Thomas clung to Claire's chair, trembling. "I don't want to go. Please don't separate us." "This is standard procedure," Alice insisted, although her tone softened slightly. "They'll be better cared for in separate homes," Claire said bitterly, her hand closing around the letters in her bag, finding a new resolve. "These boys are my nephews, children of my sister Sophie Laurent. I have her letters to prove it." Alice paused, surprised. That needs to be verified." "Verify it," Claire snapped. "But right now, let me stay with my nephew. He needs me. They need me." At that moment, a doctor appeared. "The boy is asking for Miss Claire." Thomas glanced pleadingly at the social worker, still holding onto Claire's wheelchair. "Please. Miss Claire is our family now." Alice Martin observed the scene for a long moment. The woman in a wheelchair who had rushed a sick child to the hospital in the middle of the night, the boy clinging to her as if his life depended on it, the worried taxi driver waiting in the corridor. 24 hours, she finally said. "You have 24 hours to prove the relationship. Until then, you can stay together." Claire released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Let's go, Thomas. Your brother needs us." Robert, the taxi driver, approached them. "If you need anything, here's my card. Just call." Claire thanked him with a nod, moved by his unexpected kindness. As she followed the doctor through the hospital corridors, she clutched Sophie's letters in her bag. Sophie was with them that night, in every word she wrote with love, in every protective act of Thomas, in every battle yet to be fought. "Will he be okay?" Thomas asked softly, his small hand finding Claire's. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied, surprised at how naturally the term of endearment came. "I won't let anything happen to you two. Never again." The night would be long, but Claire Laurent had finally found something worth fighting for, something greater than pride, greater than fear, greater than any physical limitations. She had found the love her sister had tried so hard to teach her, and for that love she would move mountains. Outside the hospital, a gathering storm seemed to mirror the battle ahead, but this time, Claire wasn't alone. She had 2 little angels by her side and, in her heart, the strength of a sister who, though absent, still guided her steps through love. The steady beep of hospital monitors marked the passing hours as Claire watched over Paul's restless sleep. The doctor had diagnosed a severe pneumonia, but the antibiotics were taking effect. Thomas finally dozed off in a makeshift chair, exhausted after hours of vigil by his brother's side. In the silence of the early morning, Claire opened her bag and pulled out the letters. 24 hours to prove the relationship, Alice had said. 24 hours to fix years of mistakes. The first letter she reopened held a surprise, a small envelope of photographs she hadn't noticed before. Her hands trembled as she revealed the first image. Sophie in a hospital bed, looking tired but radiant, holding 2 tiny bundles. "My dear sister," the accompanying note began, "today your nephews arrived in this world. Thomas was born first, already protecting the way for Paul. They're so small, Claire, yet full of personality. Thomas doesn't cry. He just makes a serious face that reminds me so much of you when you're focused. Paul is more sensitive. He cries easily, but his smile lights up the whole room." Claire glanced at the boys now. Thomas, even in sleep, wore that protective expression. Paul, despite his fever, had a serene look that projected peace. How had she not seen it before? How could she have been so blind? The next letter contained more photos, the twins at their first birthday, covered in cake. "They ask about Aunt Claire," Sophie had written. "I show them your picture and tell stories from when we were little." Thomas stops whatever he's doing to listen, while Paul hugs the photo as if he can feel your love through it. A tear fell on the photograph, and Claire carefully wiped it away. On the hospital bed, Paul stirred, murmuring in his feverish sleep. She took his warm little hand, feeling the weight of every missed moment. "Miss Claire," a sleepy voice came from Thomas. "Are you crying?" "Come here, sweetheart," she said softly, showing him the photos. "I want to show you something." Thomas approached, his eyes widening at the images. "That's us, as babies." "Yes," Claire replied, her voice trembling. "Your mum sent me these. She wanted me to be part of your lives so badly. Why didn't you ever come see us?" Thomas asked innocently, a question that pierced her heart. Claire took a deep breath. She owed these little angels the truth. "Because I was a very different person, Thomas. I was so obsessed with money and power that I forgot what really mattered: family." She picked up another letter, written when the boys were 3. "Today Thomas defended Paul from an older boy in the park," Sophie had written. "He has your strength, Claire. That same determination you always had to protect those you love. And Paul? Paul has your sensitive heart, the one you hid from the world but that I always saw. Mom talked about you a lot," Thomas said quietly, looking at the photos. "Sometimes she'd get sad, staring out the window. Paul would ask why Aunt Claire never came, and she'd say that one day you'd realize love was more important than anything else." The last letter in the stack was different. The paper was crumpled, as if it had been wet and dried multiple times. The date was just a week before Sophie passed away. "My dear sister, if you're reading this, it means you've finally opened your heart. Maybe I'm no longer there, but I know one day you'll find my boys, our boys. When that day comes, don't blame yourself for the past. Love keeps no record of wrongs. It simply waits for the right moment to bloom. Thomas and Paul are my greatest gifts to the world, and they are also my final gift to you, Claire. Through them, you can rediscover the girl you used to be, the one who protected me from thunder, who sang me to sleep, who believed that love was the most powerful force in the world. I will always be with you, in each of the boys' smiles, in every moment of shared love. Because family, Claire, isn't about blood or obligation, it's about love and choices. With eternal love, Sophie." Just then, Alice Martin appeared in the doorway. Her eyes took in the scattered photographs and letters, the twins close to Claire. Claire held out the photos and letters. "Here's the proof you asked for," she said softly. "Not official documents, but memories and love." Alice picked up an old photo showing 2 girls in a rose garden, Claire and Sophie, years ago. She compared it to the more recent rose garden photo the twins had found in a book. The resemblance was undeniable. The same smiles, the same eyes, the same sisterly love captured in 2 different eras. "And here," Claire continued, showing pictures of the newborn twins and the letters documenting their growth, "is the story of an aunt who took too long to understand what truly mattered." Alice examined each photo and letter in silence. Finally, she looked at the boys, Thomas protecting Claire with his small arm, Paul still holding her hand in his feverish sleep. "Sometimes," Alice said quietly, "the strongest proof of family isn't on paper, but in small acts of love." She closed her own folder. "The boys can stay with you, Miss Laurent. Of course, there will be follow-up visits, but it's clear they've already found their home." Thomas and Paul clung even more tightly to Claire, whose heart felt like it would burst from joy. "Did you hear that?" Claire whispered to her nephews. "You get to stay with me." "Forever?" Paul asked from his hospital bed, his eyes bright despite the fever. "Forever," Claire confirmed, kissing his hot forehead. "Mom always said one day our family would be complete again," Thomas said softly, a smile lighting his serious face. Claire looked toward the window, where the sun was finally breaking through the night, painting the sky with hopeful colors. "Thank you, Sophie," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me, for giving me this second chance through your Our Little Angels." And there, In that hospital room, amid proof of a love that transcended years of silence and the promise of a future filled with joy, Claire Laurent finally understood the true meaning of family. Because sometimes, as Sophie always believed, love simply waits for the right moment to bloom. And now was their moment. The mansion's kitchen was bathed in gentle morning light, filled with the aroma of fresh toast and hot chocolate. A new ritual had taken shape naturally. Thomas sat at the breakfast table, reading the newspaper aloud to Claire while Paul drew pictures, scattering crayons everywhere. Ployer, now Ned. Thomas read slowly, his finger carefully following the words. Very good, Claire encouraged, admiring his determination with difficult words. Keep going. Renowned entrepreneur Richard Morton announces the reopening of Morton Enterprises with an investment of... Thomas paused, frowning. This number has lots of zeros. Claire felt her blood run cold. Let me see that, honey. The headline struck her like a slap. Morton Empire rises from the ashes with multi-million-dollar investment. The photo showed her former partner, Richard Morton, smiling arrogantly in front of a new corporate building. You went pale, Paul observed, abandoning his crayons. Want me to make a picture to cheer you up? Claire forced a smile, but her mind was racing. Richard Morton, the man who took control of her companies while she was recovering, claiming they were on the brink of bankruptcy, the one who persuaded her to sign countless documents while she was medicated and depressed. Thomas, could you read some more? She asked, trying to keep her voice calm. After a period of restructuring, Morton announces a triumphant return to the market, Thomas continued, his childish voice in stark contrast to the gravity of the words. Each sentence of the article clicked into place. The suspicious transfers, the strange financial reports, the key employees who were mysteriously replaced. Richard wasn't saving her companies. He'd been systematically stealing them. Done, Paul announced proudly, holding up a colorful drawing. It's you smiling. To chase away sadness, Claire looked at the picture, a figure in a wheelchair surrounded by flowers and hearts, wearing a huge smile. Next to her, two smaller figures holding hands with the first. It's our family, Paul explained, his eyes shining. That innocent picture awoke something inside Claire, a strength she thought she'd lost. She wouldn't just fight for her assets, but for the future of these little angels who had come into her life. It's beautiful, sweetheart, she said, carefully placing the drawing aside. I need to make an important phone call. Can you two play in the library for a bit? The boys nodded, though Thomas hesitated at the door. Are you sure you'll be okay? I'll be fine, Claire assured him, touched by his concern. Sometimes grown-ups have to fix mistakes. Once the twins left, Claire picked up her phone. The number was still there, despite 5 years of non-use. Robert Hansen, her old friend and private investigator, one of the many she had driven away with her arrogance. The phone rang 3 times before a familiar voice answered. Hansen here. Robert, it's Claire Laurent. Silence thundered on the other end of the line. Claire Laurent asking for help, he finally responded, sarcasm dripping from his words. The world must be ending. You were right, she admitted, each word scraping her pride. About everything. About how I had changed. About how I was pushing away the people who cared. 5 years, Claire, Robert interrupted. 5 years since I tried to warn you about Morton, and you told me to mind my own business. I know, she whispered, tears burning her eyes. I was blinded by arrogance, by bitterness. But now I have a reason to fight. Laughter from Paul drifted in from the hall, followed by Thomas's protective voice. Careful with those books, buddy. Are those children's voices? Robert asked, surprised. Claire took a deep breath and told him everything. About Sophie, about the twins, about how 2 children had thawed her frozen heart. She spoke of the empty mansion, of unopened letters, of second chances and redemption. When she finished, the silence on the other end was different. Morton is reopening the company, Claire continued. With money, I suspect is mine. I need your help, Robert. Not for me, but for them, for the family I'm trying to rebuild. Send me the newspaper article, Robert finally replied, and any documents you still have from that time. I'll need time, and it won't be cheap. Money's not a problem, Claire began automatically, then stopped, laughing at herself. Actually, it is I'm practically broke. But I can sell a few remaining valuables. Mortgage... Claire Laurent admitting she's broke? Robert interrupted, though his tone had softened. Now I believe you've changed. Right then, Paul ran into the kitchen, followed by Thomas. Look, Aunt Claire, we found a book full of numbers in the library. It was an old ledger she barely remembered. I told you to wait, Thomas protested, ever the guardian. Claire glanced from the ledger to the phone. Robert, the boys might have just found something interesting. After arranging details with Robert, Claire called the twins over. You've helped me find something very important, she explained gently. Sometimes angels appear in the smallest details. Just like Mom said, Paul exclaimed. She said angels are hidden in little things. We just have to pay attention. Your mom was very wise, Claire smiled, pulling them into a hug. Are you still sad? Thomas asked, his expression serious. No, sweetheart. Now I'm determined. Do you know what that means? They shook their heads. It means I'm going to fight for what's right, Claire explained. Like you do when you protect your brother, Thomas. Like both of you did when you helped me rediscover love. So we can help, Paul declared, grabbing his crayons. I'll make more happy pictures. And I can read more news, Thomas offered, proud of his new skill. Claire felt her heart overflow with love. Richard Morton might have stolen her fortune, but he couldn't touch the love of these two little angels who had changed her life. Yes, my darlings, she replied, watching Paul start a new drawing while Thomas returned to the newspaper. You're already helping more than you know. And as the boys busied themselves, Claire began to plan. The battle would be tough, but now she had something far more valuable than money to fight for. She had a family. And this time, she wouldn't let anything or anyone take away what truly mattered. Claire watched the rain batter the library windows, the old ledger open in her lap. Robert had spent the entire afternoon explaining his latest findings over the phone, each one more disturbing than the last. The transfers began 3 days after your accident, he'd said. Morton took advantage of your sedation in the hospital to start systematically siphoning funds. Within 6 months, he'd moved over 70% of the company's capital into offshore accounts. Now, alone with her thoughts, Claire examined the bank statements Robert had obtained. The pattern was as clear as day. While she battled depression and adapted to her wheelchair, Richard Morton dismantled her empire piece by piece. Miss Claire, a small voice interrupted her thoughts. Thomas stood at the library door, holding a glass of milk. You didn't come down for dinner. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I got caught up in these papers. Thomas approached, placing the milk carefully on the table. Paul made hot chocolate, but it got cold, so now it's just chocolate milk. Claire smiled without meaning to. It was amazing how the twins' small gestures could brighten even the darkest moments. You look sad again, Thomas observed, his sharp insight always surprising. Not sad, love, just worried. Is it because of that bad man in the newspaper? Claire blinked, surprised. How did you... I saw how you changed when I was reading, Thomas explained, sitting beside her chair. Mom got that way too when she had money problems, but she always said money is just paper. Love is the real treasure. The boy's simple words struck Claire like lightning. Sophie had always been wise in a way Claire, in her arrogance, called naive. At that moment, Paul appeared at the door, dragging his favorite blanket. A gift Sophie had made for him, as Claire had recently discovered. Without a word, Paul approached and carefully laid the blanket over Claire's legs. To warm your heart, he explained simply, echoing a phrase surely learned from their mum. Tears stung Claire's eyes. Here she was, agonizing over spending her last resources on an investigation when her true wealth was right in front of her. The phone rang, breaking the moment. It was Robert again. Claire, I managed to get in touch with Anne Martinez, he said abruptly. Remember her, the lawyer you humiliated in that board meeting 6 years ago? Claire shut her eyes, the painful memory flooding back. She'd called Anne a small-time attorney when she tried to warn about Morton's irregularities. She agreed to help us. Surprisingly, yes. She wants to meet you in person first. An hour later, Anne Martinez walked into the Laurent Mansion's library. Claire barely recognized her. The once insecure junior attorney had become a poised, confident woman. "Hello, Claire," Anne greeted curtly. Then her eyes found the twins, and who were busy drawing in a corner of the library. "And who are these adorable children?" "My nephews," Claire replied, pride evident in her voice. "Thomas and Paul." Anne took in the scene, the scattered drawings, the blanket lovingly placed over Claire's legs, the protective looks the boys gave their aunt. "Robert told me about your sister," Anne said gently. "I'm sorry for your loss." "I am too," Claire said, voice trembling. "I'm sorry for a lot of things, Anne, including how I treated you at that meeting." Anne set some documents on the table. "Do you know why I agreed to come?" "Robert told me something I had to see with my own eyes, that Claire Laurent had learned how to apologize." Paul chose that moment to approach with a drawing for Anne. "It's Aunt Claire fighting the bad man from the newspaper," he explained. "I made her bigger than him because love is stronger than money." Anne took the drawing, a smile softening her features. "You know what? I think I'll frame this for my office." She turned to Claire. "How much can you invest to start the lawsuit?" Claire inhaled shakily. "Honestly? Almost nothing. I'd have to sell the last valuable things in the house. Maybe mortgage." "No," Anne interrupted. "You won't do that. But I'll take your case pro bono," Anne declared. "On one condition. Once you recover any funds, a significant portion goes into an education trust for these boys." Claire felt her heart skip a beat. "Anne, This isn't for you, Claire," Anne said with a smile, watching Thomas, who was now also approaching with another drawing. "It's for them. And maybe a bit for the young lawyer you once humiliated, who now sees something worth fighting for." Thomas handed her the drawing, a portrait of Anne wearing a superhero cape. "'Cause you're gonna help Aunt Claire get justice," he explained seriously. Anne laughed, a genuine laugh that broke the remaining tension. "You know, Claire, I think you finally found something more valuable than all the money Morton stole." Claire looked at her nephews, Thomas with his protective seriousness, Paul with his overflowing sweetness. "Yes," she whispered. "I've found my real treasure." That night, after Anne left with a folder full of evidence and 2 carefully kept children's drawings, Claire lay awake in thought. The decision that had seemed impossible now was crystal clear. "Aunt Claire?" Paul called from the door, holding his teddy bear. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" "Me too," Thomas asked, appearing beside his brother. "Of course, my loves," Claire replied, her heart overflowing. As the boys settled in around her, Claire realized some choices aren't really choices at all. Because when you find your true treasure, everything else is just details. "Good night, Aunt Claire," the twins murmured in unison. "Good night, my little angels," she answered, knowing that no matter what happened in the upcoming legal battle, she had already won the most valuable prize of all, a family. The courtroom was packed that morning. Claire could feel everyone's eyes on her as she maneuvered her wheelchair to the front of the room. Richard Morton sat on the other side, his arrogance still visible despite the damning evidence against him. Thomas and Paul were in the first row, wearing the small suits Anne had helped pick out. Paul clutched his teddy bear, while Thomas kept his usual protective stance. Next to them, Robert and Anne organized the final proofs. "Miss Laurent," the judge called. "Are you requested to make a statement before closing arguments?" Claire took a deep breath, her hands slightly trembling on the wheelchair rims. "Yes, Your Honor." She turned her chair to face the audience. There were faces she hadn't seen in years, former employees, ex-business partners, people she had pushed away with her arrogance. "I'm here today not only to expose a fraud," she began, her voice gaining strength, "but to expose a greater truth, my own." Morton flashed a contemptuous smile from his seat, but Claire continued, "For years, I built an empire based on numbers, profit margins, growth indexes, market value. I turned people into statistics, relationships into transactions, including my own sister." Her voice quavered slightly when she mentioned Sophie. Paul half rose, wanting to comfort her, but Thomas held his hand, understanding the importance of the moment. "When I had the accident that left me paraplegic, I was at the peak of my success and at the bottom of my failure as a human being. That's when Richard Morton saw his opportunity. Not just to steal my company for, but to exploit something I had created myself, an environment where numbers mattered more than people. Claire pulled one of Sophie's letters from her folder. While I was in the hospital, signing every document he put in front of me, my sister was trying to reach me. She wrote letters I, in my arrogance, never opened. Letters about the birth of her children, my nephews. A murmur ran through the court. Morton shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The evidence of fraud is irrefutable, Claire continued, indicating the stacks of documents on Anne's table. Systematic transfers, fraudulent contracts, manipulated balances. It's all there, meticulously documented by courageous people who refuse to stay silent. She paused, looking directly at Anne. People I once belittled, but who today show me what integrity really means. Your Honor, Morton tried to interrupt, but the judge silenced him with a gesture. But the real fraud, Claire went on, was the one I committed against myself. I believed success was measured in bank digits. I believed power meant never needing to say sorry. I believed family was an inconvenience that got in the way of business. She turned her wheelchair to face the twins. Then, fate gave me a second chance. On a stormy night, two little angels entered my empty mansion. Two boys who had lost everything but still had so much love to give. Paul smiled through tears, clutching his teddy bear. Thomas remained strong, but his eyes shone with pride. I discovered they were my nephews through old photos and unread letters. Letters my sister wrote until her last days, still believing that one day I'd realize love is worth more than any fortune. Claire pulled out one of Paul's drawings from her folder, the one of their united family. I learned more about true value from a 5-year-old's drawings than in decades of corporate meetings. I learned more about strength from watching Thomas care for his brother than in all my years running companies. Tears streamed freely down her face now, but she didn't try to hide them. Richard Morton robbed my company using my own arrogance as his tool. He knew I was so isolated in my ivory tower that no one would come to my aid. And he was right back then. She looked at Robert, who gave her an encouraging smile. But people can change. They can learn. They can redeem themselves. So, Your Honor, I don't just ask for justice against financial crimes. I ask for a chance to turn this story of greed into a story of redemption. The courtroom was utterly silent. Even Morton had lost his arrogant expression. If we recover the stolen funds, Claire continued, a significant portion will go toward an educational program for underprivileged children. Because my sister Sophie was a teacher, and her biggest dream was to make a difference in the lives of children who, like her sons, need a chance. She turned her chair to face Morton one last time. You might have stolen my money, Richard, but you gave me something much more valuable in return, the opportunity to discover who I was truly meant to be. When Claire finished, the hush in the courtroom was deafening. It was broken only by Paul running up to her, ignoring Thomas's whispered protest, to throw his arms around her. I love you, Aunt Claire, he said loud enough for all to hear. Thomas joined them, more reserved but equally moved. We both love you. The judge cleared his throat, visibly emotional. I believe we can recess for 15 minutes before final statements. As people began to stir, Claire was surprised to see a line forming. Former employees, business partners, even her old secretary, each with a story of how she had impacted their lives for better or worse, and how her transformation now inspired them. Miss Laurent, her old secretary said, tears in her eyes. I brought something I think you'll want to see. She handed Claire a yellowed envelope. Inside was one last letter from Sophie, delivered to the office after Claire had already shut everyone out. Dear Claire, it read, if one day you find my nephews, tell them they are living proof that love can transform any story. The same way you transformed mine, even when you thought you only cared about business. Because deep down, my sister, you were always love disguised as a fortress. Claire hugged her nephews, tears of pure happiness now. Anne approached with a smile. I don't think we need to worry about the verdict, she said gently. Morton is already negotiating a settlement. The money doesn't matter anymore, Claire replied, watching Thomas explain the word verdict to Paul with pride. I've already found my greatest treasure. That afternoon, when the judge announced a favorable ruling and the terms of financial restitution, Claire barely listened. She was too busy watching her nephews draw another family portrait, one that now included all the new friends they had made at court. Because sometimes, as Sophie always knew, you have to lose everything to find what truly matters. And Claire Laurent, the woman who once measured her life in profits and losses, finally understood that the greatest gain of all was the love now filling her heart. The aroma of freshly baked cookies filled the air of the small bakery, sweet angels. Claire adjusted the tray in the display window, watching Thomas and Paul at a nearby table, focused on decorating cookies with colorful icing. "Look, Aunt Claire," Paul exclaimed, holding up a cookie. "I made a rainbow because it's going to be sunny today. And I made chocolate clouds," Thomas added, always more practical, "because everyone likes chocolate." 6 months had passed since the trial. The Laurent mansion, with its empty corridors and bitter memories, had been sold. In place of its cold marble grandeur, they now had a rented house with a garden, where the boys could plant flowers, and this little bakery that had become the heart of their new life. The idea came during an afternoon of homemade cookies, when Paul suggested that people needed to taste Aunt Claire's treats because they make your heart smile. At first, she hesitated. Claire Laurent, former CEO of a corporate empire, selling cookies. But then Thomas chimed in with childlike wisdom. "Mom always said that any work done with love is never simple." "Miss Claire," called a tiny voice. It was Maria, a regular customer of about 7 years old. "Do you have star cookies today?" "Of course we do, sweetie," Claire answered, maneuvering her wheelchair behind the counter. "Paul just finished decorating some, especially for you." The bakery had become a neighborhood gathering spot. Children came after school for the twins' decorated cookies. Mothers gathered for coffee, charmed by the story of the family everyone knew by now. Even busy professionals dropped by for a sweet moment. Many recognized Claire from her old life. But now they saw something far more valuable than power. They saw peace. "Aunt Claire," Thomas called, coming over with a recipe book. "Can we try making those Christmas cookies Mom used to bake?" Claire felt her heart warm with a gentle ache. Sophie was everywhere in this bakery, in the recipes the boys remembered, in the smiles they handed out, in the love baked into every treat. "Of course we can, sweetheart. We'll do it tonight after closing." Evenings at the bakery were special. After the last customer left, the three of them experimented with new recipes. Claire discovered she loved teaching the boys how to measure ingredients, mix dough, and create decorations. Her wheelchair, once a symbol of limitation, now glided easily among the adapted counters. "Do you know," Paul said one night, covered in flour. "Mom was right." "About what, honey?" "She said one day we'd have a family full of sweetness." Claire paused her kneading, tears in her eyes. Thomas instantly offered a napkin, always alert to others' needs. "These are good tears," she reassured them, pulling them both into a flowery hug. "They're happy tears." Life wasn't always easy. Some days the wheelchair felt heavier. Some moments, memories of the old life tried to creep in. But then Paul would appear with a new drawing for the menu, or Thomas would proudly show how he'd organized the inventory like an executive, and it all made sense again. The money recovered in the settlement was placed in a fund for the boys' education. Claire insisted part of it go to scholarships for other children, a legacy Sophie would have approved of. One particularly busy morning, Anne dropped by the bakery. Now a close friend, she came regularly for coffee and a chat. "You know, Claire," she commented, watching the twins help an elderly lady pick out cookies, "I never thought I'd say this, but you're richer now than when you ran that empire." Claire smiled knowingly. Her wealth was now measured in the twins' laughter, in spontaneous hugs, in small daily triumphs. It was measured in the pride of creating something with her own hands, in the joy of seeing people gather at her bakery, in belonging to a community that valued her for who she was. "Aunt Claire," Paul called excitedly, "look who's here." Robert, the taxi driver turned family friend, entered carrying a package. "I brought that cookbook I promised," he announced. "And I couldn't resist some new cookie cutters for my favorite little chefs." The boys ran to hug him. He'd become a sort of honorary uncle over the months. Claire watched, her heart overflowing. Her family had grown in unexpected, wonderful ways. Later that afternoon, as they closed the bakery, Thomas and Paul insisted on showing her their latest creation, cookies shaped like a wheelchair with angel wings. "It's you," Paul explained, "because you're our guardian angel." "No," Claire corrected gently, pulling them into a hug. "You two are my angels. You taught me that sometimes we need to lose everything to find what really matters." Together, they watched the sunset through the bakery's front window. The tables were clean, the cookies put away, the sweet scent still lingering in the air. On the wall hung a special picture frame displaying Paul's first drawing of her, now placed beside a photo of Sophie. "Aunt Claire," Thomas asked drowsily, almost bedtime, "do you regret it, trading the mansion for cookies?" Claire smiled, kissing each nephew's forehead. "Not for a second, sweetheart. I learned life is like a recipe. It's not about how many ingredients you have, but the love you mix into them." Paul was already asleep in her lap, his little apron still smeared with colored icing. Thomas fought sleep, determined to help close up. "Let's go home," Claire suggested softly. "Tomorrow we have more cookies to make, more smiles to share." As she locked up Sweet Angels, Claire Laurent, former magnate, now baker, and, most importantly, aunt to two little angels, felt a peace no bank account could ever buy. True success, she finally understood, isn't measured in zeros but in love multiplied. And there on that quiet street, with two sleepy boys and a modest bakery, she knew she had found her real home. Because sometimes the greatest treasure isn't what you possess, but who you become. And Claire Laurent had finally become the person her sister always knew she could be.